Hello and welcome to the Thursday, August 7th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Cybersecurity Leadership. Sextortion scams, well, they were a big thing like a few years ago and have died down a little bit, but ever so often there's like a flare-up of them. Like the last couple of weeks, I received about a dozen or so emails with this cooperation offer subject in line. Jan now took a quick look to figure out whether or not any of these scams are still successful. He looked at a couple dozen different email addresses and the associated cryptocurrency addresses that were attached to those emails, and well, sadly, a couple of them did get deposits in line with what they asked for as part of these extortion scams. This is really sort of a little bit an awareness issue, but then also remember that even though the scam itself is old, not everybody may actually have received a copy, and then depending on current circumstances, people may or may not be more vulnerable to this. Just read on social media from someone who's actually very cyber aware and such, and that they fell for like one of those UPS scams lately and entered their credit card number trying to basically have their package redelivered, and they were actually just waiting for a package. So it all depends on the circumstances, whether or not someone falls for these. These style of messages, of course, are also relatively easy to filter automatically, which is probably why I haven't really seen many of them, because my spam filters and such will typically take care of them. And then we got a couple additional pieces to the puzzle when it comes to the somewhat mysterious SonicWall compromise that were then used by the Akira ransomware group to gain access to corporate networks. Another tool they're apparently using are, well, the good old bring your own vulnerable driver attack, where they are installing drivers that are legitimate on the system. So they're usually allowed by EDR and the like, to then escalate privileges and disable EDR tools. This is a very common trick. The two drivers mentioned here, one of them sort of a CPU tuning driver, are legitimate, again, legitimate tools, but not very commonly used. So the presence of those drivers, particular sort of in business, corporate PC environments, should certainly raise a flag and be investigated. There is additional indicators of compromise and such in the Guidepoint Security blog, where they're talking about the parts of the attack that they observed. And if you are using Adobe's Experience Manager, it's a time to patch, and this is sort of an out-of-order patch. Of course, we usually get Adobe patches at the same time Microsoft releases patches, so next Tuesday, I guess, we'll get some patches from Adobe, but these were released this week for Experience Manager because there are two vulnerabilities that are already, at least, well, if not being exploited, there's a proof of concept publicly available, so exploitation is probably, at least in a targeted way, already happening. Adobe also released an advisory for these particular vulnerabilities, and again, patches are available. And talking about critical and emergency patches, Trend Micro released a patch for its Apex One on-premise management console. This patch fixes a command injection vulnerability. It does allow remote code execution pre-authentication. The reason they essentially rushed out this patch is that the vulnerability is already being exploited in the wild. One word of caution here, that they call this sort of a fix tool. It's not the final patch. It does limit the functionality of your Apex One console. You're no longer able to use the remote install agent to deploy agents with Trend Micro Apex One after you apply this fix. The final patch should be released mid-August, so in a week or so, I guess. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking, subscribing, and special thanks for leaving good comments for this podcast in your favorite podcast platform and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.